March the 1st last year, 250,000 people descended on London in one of Britain's biggest demonstrations. Two factions, both determined to defend fox hunting, had come together in the Countryside Alliance. But behind the placards, a bitter feud was brewing. Ex-Tory MP Lord Kimble had long led the Old Guard.
I know a very large number of people enjoy it, and what is anybody doing wrong? What harm are we doing? Huh? Why shouldn't we continue? It's perfectly legal, legitimate sport, and it's great fun.
The Old Guard's strongest weapon was an eloquent Australian.
Arsehole!
Their press officer, Janet George. For the march, they had formed an alliance with an entirely different breed of field sport supporters.
Embracing change and managing change is very, very positive.
We made a change for good.
People who fear it and aren't used to it become very dangerous.
Eric Bettelheim and his chief executive, Edward Juke, were two businessmen determined to modernise the country folks' fight.
The Countryside Alliance needed change.
If you've not lived with change, it's very, very difficult to accept it.
In a bitter and acrimonious battle, the two sides were to tear themselves apart as the businessmen came up against the Old Guard.
I was the wrong man, the wrong class, and the wrong sort for them, and I think that was their difficulty.
I don't want to moan about him too much. It makes it sound like it's sort of all, I'm bitter and twisted about it. I mean, I don't mind that he was a fuckwit. That was his problem.
Eton, Trinity Cambridge, Master of Hounds, MP and now Lord, Marcus Kimble.
What are we doing, actually? We're, through the medium of a trained animal, a hound, we're pitting our wits against the skill of a wild animal. And 9 times out of 10, the fox triumphs.
As chairman and president of the British Field Sports Society, Lord Kimble had been loyally defending fox hunting for his community since the 1960s.
Yeah, they're all members of the hunt. They're all chums. I should have gone home. Look who you've met today. Somebody who runs a major pork pie factory, somebody who has a major hosiery business in Leicester, the chairman of Weatherby's. Look at, I mean, you've got a whole cross-section of people, haven't you? It's amazing.
Kimble's old way of doing things, whispering to his chums in Parliament, was under threat. The battlefield was about to move into a far more public arena. In 1991, the League Against Cruel Sports infiltrated Britain's most prestigious hunt, the Quorn. They filmed the hunt feeding a live fox to the hounds, against the rules. The war had moved to prime-time television.
Everybody can make a mistake. You can make a mistake whenever you're dealing with wild animals. But of course, because it was the Quorn, it became a major mistake.
The Old Guard's media incompetence incensed one particular huntswoman.
I was watching television in the evening, probably with a dog sitting on me, and I was just aghast at it, and I just couldn't believe that they could have been so stupid.
Today, the senior master of the hunt defended what happened.
Not everyone, or not all the earth stoppers, had been informed of how they should conduct themselves on a day's hunting.
The master that responded should not have been allowed on the television, because he was the caricature of a hunting person. But also, he wasn't saying anything that helped the situation. He was throwing petrol on the flames.
In my opinion, a very small transgression,
My view was that if there weren't very, very major changes very quickly, hunting was doomed.
For Janet George, Presbyterian Ladies' College, Sydney, music PR, pedigree sheep farmer, and occasional journalist.
Naughty!
This was the moment to change the image of Kimble's British Field Sports Society.
She'd normally be out hunting this morning, but she's on the line now.
This is the same tired old discredited propaganda that...
Janet George began her long career as their press officer.
They are animal rights terrorists.
Good morning, Miss George.
Good morning. And there's tremendous...
Her classless, combative style meant she was soon dubbed the voice of the countryside.
We did have a lot of success with the press, purely because of hard work. I mean, there is no magic to being a press officer.
Thank you.
You know, people always sort of talk about having good contacts or, you know, taking editors out to lunch or whatever. Rubbish, you know. Journalists are there to do a job. Press officers' job is to help them do their job.
When Janet George was in place, it was so wonderful to go round and have everybody say, instead of saying the usual thing, oh, the PR is very bad, which they always say about any organisation, whether it's a Conservative Party or what, but then you went round on behalf of the British Field Sports Society, as it was then, and everybody would say, gosh, the PR's good.
Pleased though Kimball was with the press, the anti-Hunt lobby was becoming increasingly dangerous. For one city lawyer with a penchant for shooting, the Field Sports Society wasn't up to the modern battle.
The people running it had a tendency to be retired military personnel. They had a tendency to be people only involved in what I call shire hunting. They had a tendency to be people from a very narrow form of what I might call upper middle class British society.
For him, fighting with the methods of the county old guard should be replaced with the modern ways of the city. American-born, Jewish, derivatives guru, and son of the famous psychoanalyst Bruno, Eric Bettelheim set up his own countryside business group to defend his shooting passion. The battle lines were being drawn.
What I set out to do was to try and create an organization based upon business lines. That is, one that was professionally managed, which was independently audited, and most importantly, was managed by mature businessmen who people would have confidence in giving large sums of money to defend their way of life.
Greatest pleasure in introducing you to Eric Bettelheim.
80% of the population of this country thinks that you are murderous bastards.
He toured the country to raise money, politicize the countryfolk, and modernize their tactics.
I often compared them to blacks or to gays and said, you are in the same position as they are. You are a minority in your own country, and you have to defend yourself like a minority.
Just like other minorities, he thought countryfolk needed a pressure group to raise money, to pay for adverts, and hire professionals.
If we don't raise this money, and if we don't spend it effectively, you are history.
Money's not everything. I used to run the society, and we won, 5 bob subscription, and I always refused to let it be put up.
I don't think you need to look very far in modern politics to see that, as one of my old clients, Drexel Burnham, used to put it, money talks and bullshit walks.
Well, Eric Bettelheim thinks that you run lobbying in this country like you do in Washington, and thank goodness you don't. Money does not buy influence at Westminster. What buys influence at Westminster is when effective members of Parliament walk into the whip's office and say they're worried about things. That's what counts.
As the two field sports organisations pursued their different strategies, the chief officer of the League Against Cruel Sports, John Bryant, sensed victory.
I've believed, ever since I've been involved in the animal welfare movement, that for the abolition of hunting, we needed a Labour government with a large majority.
With the Tories set for defeat, it seemed that hunting might disappear from the countryside forever. May 1997.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
What Kimball and Janet George's British Field Sports Society and Bettelheim's business group had been preparing for had arrived.
Where the cattle are now. We have been elected as New Labour, and we will govern as New Labour.
New Labour promised a free vote to ban hunting, and with such a huge majority, the antis were convinced the end of hunting was nigh.
I just celebrated. I went charging around the house after listening to the results, realising that this was it. Labour was elected with a big majority, and it was just like this huge burden lifted.
It made life a great deal more difficult because we didn't have the same contacts within government as we had under the Conservatives. And obviously there was a majority of MPs who would support an anti-hunting bill.
People began to realize that they were in a political fight of a very different kind. The old forms of whispering in the minister's ear, of tying it up in parliamentary procedure and so on, were no longer going to be enough.
For everyone in the hunting lobby, New Labour's new danger required a new kind of organisation.
Everyone in the countryside I spoke to wanted a single voice, as they put it, for the countryside and for field sports. They wanted a new form of organization which would represent the broad church which both field sports and the countryside are.
Bettelheim, Janet George and Lord Kimball would have to try and put their rivalries to one side. Just weeks after the election, the Countryside Business Group and the British Field Sports Society came together within a new organisation, the Countryside Alliance. Not a moment too soon. June 1997, the threat became real. New Labour MP Michael Foster won a private member's ballot and put up a bill to ban hunting. To become law, Foster's bill would need 3 Commons readings over a year. The battle had begun.
I thought, this is it. I'm actually going to see it happen. I'm going to see the end of hunting. 30-year campaign. We've got a Labour government, a big majority. We can't be stopped now.
But for a private member's bill to become law, the government must give it time to get through Parliament. The Alliance had less than a year to convince the government not to support it. The countryfolk decided on a huge demonstration.
I'm not the boss, am I? I'm not the boss? No.
As the press officer for the Alliance, Janet George had to step up her campaigning.
We had to put our own public opinion poll on the streets of London. The antis have never managed to put more than 2,000 or 3,000 people on the streets for an anti-hunt march. So we really wanted to have something so big that the government would be frightened by it.
The anti-hunt lobby were also fighting hard. 7 months after the election, the second reading of the bill, with its promised free vote.
Ayes to the right, 411.
If the majority was big enough, the government might put its weight behind the bill.
Noes to the left, 151.
Wonderful result, a huge majority, great support.
There were a lot of very, very weepy eyes and tears of joy and congratulations to Michael Foster.
It was hunting's darkest hour.
The days of hunting are doomed.
As 1997 ended, the clock was ticking on the Foster bill. Bettelheim, now on the board of the merged alliance, was looking for someone really special to modernise it. A city firm was engaged to find a new leader.
The brief to the headhunters was to find someone from a background who could appeal to everyone in the countryside. Someone who was a businessman, a good manager, someone who had a track record in running organizations, but also someone who came from a background which was credible both to the countryside community at large and also to the political classes, and particularly a Labour government.
One CV stood out. Durham Johnson Grammar School, HND in engineering, Chief Executive of Beaufort PLC, self-made Yorkshireman, Edward Juke. Edward Juke ran Wade Ceramics in Stoke-on-Trent, but was looking for a new challenge. He had transformed the pottery and thought with his experience he could lend the Countryside Alliance a hand.
When I arrived here at Wade Ceramics, we had 3 individual officers. We introduced Wade 2000, which is a program of change, and the people themselves, they were empowered to tell us what they wanted, and they wanted this sort of office, open plan with computers, so that they could communicate together all the time. This was much more profitable for our shareholders because it reduced costs.
Bettelheim was pleased with the cost-cutter's interview. He was also a fellow shooter.
When I met Edward, having described to the board of the Countryside Alliance what I thought was necessary, he fitted it to a T in every respect. Background, experience, understanding of the countryside and of modern
political and business life.
But back at headquarters, a rival candidate was also interviewed. Janet George.
Well, I'd been persuaded to apply, but I had no illusions about it. I knew I'd never get it because familiarity breeds contempt.
We interviewed all of the candidates that the headhunter had put on the short list. And in addition, we interviewed Janet George at her own request.
I was too outspoken. I was too sort of lacking in respect for the higher-ups, I think. You know, I was a little bit too inclined to call a spade a bloody shovel.
Her strengths were the strengths of someone for public relations. They were not the strengths that we needed in order to carry the organization forward.
February 1998, Juke was offered the job by a unanimous board.
Well, my reaction was, first of all, I was very flattered that they considered me as the person to take it forward. I had been frustrated, like a lot of other people out in the countryside, that it seemed as if not enough was being done.
We think the same way about the future, and it was, for me, a great pleasure to see that after 4.5 years of work, we had found the right man to take this thing forward.
Edward Juke couldn't immediately take up the job. He was still serving out his notice in his factory.
Of course, no name was announced then because Edward Juke was chairman of a listed company. So it had to be properly announced to the stock exchange because it was price-sensitive information, supposedly. In fact, I think... No, I better not say that. I was going to say Beaufort shares were so far down the shithole they couldn't have gone much further. I thought that the chief executive was leaving might have boosted them.
Janet commenting on shares in the City of London is like Santa Claus commenting on a strip club.
The new leader had been appointed, but he had to sit on his hands as Janet George prepared for the Alliance's biggest day. March the 1st, 1998. The hunting lobby had booked every available bus and train in Britain to bring 250,000 people to London.
I sort of started off having had 3 hours sleep the night before, so I was very much running on adrenaline. It was sort of dashing here and dashing there, and interviews here and interviews there.
When we got to the top of St James's Street, we were in the van of the march. A very nice police inspector said, "Goodness, you're putting your best foot forward. We didn't expect you here for another 20 minutes. Well, that was the spirit of the march. The country people were out for a walk.
They scored an unexpected triumph with this modern protest.
It was so big and so successful that we were all sort of pinching ourselves. You know, we had this awful thought that we were going to wake up and we were late and we were about to start, you know. You just couldn't quite believe that we'd managed to do it.
It was consistent, the same lovely faces. There was no angry people there. They were just genuine people who wanted to come and make a peaceful and polite protest. And I must admit, I popped into one of the St James's Club and watched the march go by for a bit. I felt very humbled to be part of the organisation that had put those people on the streets.
The incoming new manager could only stand and watch.
We were on the embankment for 2 hours and all these marches going by. To think that I was going to be involved was quite exciting.
With her new boss about to arrive, Janet George was triumphant. It was a catastrophe for the antis.
I think the Countryside March was the clincher as far as the Blair government was concerned, and I think Janet George was right when she said a government that can a cause which can put 250,000 people on the streets, no government dare take them on. And I think the government chickened out and threw in the towel. And that is outrageous for a party which since 1979 has been telling us that it wants to ban hunting.
Government support for the Foster Bill didn't materialise. 2 weeks after the march, it ran out of time. Hunting was saved for another year. The boss apparent was now ready to leave his factory to modernise this now euphoric organisation.
I was coming almost out of the north, like as if I had blue woad on my face, and I was a complete stranger to the hunting mafia in the south and the west.
But this wasn't a sick organisation. This was an organisation that was on top of the world. It had had the rally, the march, the spirit was there. We didn't need any extra skills. We needed somebody to cement and build it on.
2 weeks before Juke was there to start work, he went to meet the old leadership, but was surprised to find someone else there too, Janet George.
She talked and talked and talked, and it got to the point where there was no point in even really having a discussion. It was just listening to Janet. So I thought, well, here's an opportunity. So I lit a cigar and started to smoke and enjoy it. So I just smoked and smoked and smoked, and an hour and a half cigar just was dragged down in about 20 minutes, a complete waste. But at the end of it, it was reported back to me that she said she could work with me. So that was a successful meeting from that point of view.
He seemed pleasant enough. He made the right sorts of noises.
Well, an odd yawn and a grunt perhaps is the right sort of noise. I don't know.
So the right sorts of noises, but that's, I'm afraid, all they were.
May the 5th, Juke's very first day in the job. He took the staff off to a London hotel for a brainstorming day.
Here is where we held Alliance 2000, which was where we started the change process. Well, when I arrive, I always really make a beeline to let everybody get relaxed, get to know me and understand me.
It wasn't a case of him meeting us. It was a case of showing us him. You know, I'm here, I'm the boss now.
The idea was for everyone to spend a day identifying the problems of the organisation and developing the solutions.
He started talking about, you know, motivational techniques used for out-of-work miners.
You are all very important people.
No, we were not out-of-work miners, with all due respect to out-of-work miners. We were professionals working in an organisation that had just had the biggest, most successful event ever.
We have a saying in industry called Kaizen, which is Japanese for continuous improvement. And every one of us can always improve. And if anybody says to me, I can't improve, then I would call them a liar.
One of his opening remarks was, I'm a team player, and if you don't want to be part of my team, you can get out. If he'd come in and said, I think you're a great team and I'm really proud to be joining you, he would have won everybody. But as it was, a lot of people just said, where's this guy coming from?
At the end of the day, Edward Juke identified 13 key areas that he thought needed attention. From these, he would develop a strategy to drum up support.
Bugger all came out of it that three of us couldn't have put together in 2 hours, you know. And it cost over 20 grand.
If it was that easy, why didn't it happen 3 years previously? They had plenty of time to organise it.
Reports and bullshit. Get on and do the job, you know. There's a limit to how much you can talk about it.
Thank you very much.
Janet George made no secret of her feelings about her new boss.
Janet George took me aside and told me in no uncertain terms that she was going to get rid of that man Duke, and she was going to get rid of him fast.
Janet George's old ally thought he'd seen Duke's type before.
See, the trouble with these great tycoons, they have a whole lot of people rushing around because they're the boss. Those people say to them what they want them to hear. You see, because nobody ever kicks their ass. They're little tin-pot gods in a small world. Golf and mistresses instead of going out for other business. I got really fed up with them.
Lord Kimball had stepped down to Deputy President of the Alliance, but that didn't stop him interfering.
I also recall getting a telephone call from Lord Kimball, also making it clear that he was going to do everything he could to get rid of Edward as soon as possible. I pleaded with him to work with Edward and that this was a man that was the right man for the job.
In the reshuffle, Bettelheim had already decided to leave the board completely.
When I left the board, I felt my job was done. We'd reformed the organization. We had a new chief executive and a new board that was broadly representative of the field sports and countryside community as a whole. As far as I was concerned, 4.5 years of effort had reached exactly the right stage for me to leave and leave it to others to carry on.
Bettelheim returned to being just an ordinary gun.
If you want to shoot pheasants, you got to go to Devon.
Edward would have to fight his fellow colleagues alone.
There was always going to be a problem with Janet because she was very strong-willed, she had no strategy, and of course she felt that she was the chief executive.
Juke had bigger priorities than one maverick employee. He wanted to write his strategy fast, the pitch on how to get more money into the coffers.
Go on, get on. I spent more time organising the strategy than anything else. Because after all, before I'd arrived, Kennington Road was running and ticking over. So I didn't think it was important that I got involved in that straight away. The most important part was to find out what we needed in the strategy, was to use that to raise the funds so that we could get the troops that we needed to achieve our objectives.
Juke felt even the money they did have was being spent wrongly.
We were spending large sums of money on stands at the game fair and badminton and Burley, and where we really needed to be spending our money was in the White Rose shopping centre in Leeds and the Labour Party conference.
But Juke's modern business ideas were falling on deaf ears.
Like all business plans, it was being shuffled round and written by some outside lady and everything else. In all my life, I've never thought a bigger waste of time than responsibility charts and business plans. People spend their lives shuffling paper round and changing their job designations, and they don't get on with the job.
By concentrating on his priorities, he upset the office staff.
We saw very, very little of him for weeks. He locked himself away in the office with some little female that he'd found from somewhere who was supposed to be a marketing genius. And we didn't see him.
One or two points they complained that they never saw me, but I never saw them either.
If they had complaints about his management style, he questioned their professionalism too.
Janet was alone to herself. I asked her several times to do things, and she just ignored it. I said Janet had a horse and it kicked her. I said it would, wouldn't it?
Away from the petty bickering of the London HQ, Juke spent much of the time at his home in Yorkshire, urgently writing his plan.
They were big boys and being paid good money, and I expected them to get on with their own running of the department, and I wasn't to hold their hand.
Janet George was ever more convinced that his strategy was going to ruin her hard work.
He was coming from another world, totally different world. A world of pounds, shillings and pence and profit and loss, rather than of very much a thing that people believed in.
What makes a good hunter? Honesty must not stop on you, because you have a tendency to keep going when they stop, and you clear the hedge and it doesn't, and it can be quite dangerous. Where you learn to actually anticipate things on a horse, you have to anticipate things as a manager too, and try and read ahead of what people are thinking and how they're working and what they want to do. Oh, Birdie, come on, Birdie.
But there was one thing that Juke didn't anticipate. While the cat was away, the mice had been playing. June the 12th, just 6 weeks into Juke's new job, Janet George lit the touch paper. Juke heard that she, with 3 other senior staff, had written a memo to the board expressing their lack of confidence in him.
The memo basically said that we had no confidence in his ability to lead the organisation. We felt he didn't understand campaigning, political lobbying, PR, and he wasn't prepared to listen to the people that did. That was basically, and that we thought his business plan was rubbish. Nice, mild little memo like that, really.
The letter arose because I had persuaded them that they must stand together. If he'd been able to pick them off one by one, he would have been able to take the whole thing over. That's a normal business tactics. I persuaded them all the heads of departments, don't go individually.
I was disappointed that they sent it straight to the board. They should have really talked it over with me. But that happens.
Only 4 days after receiving it, the board asked Janet to withdraw the memo. She refused.
It was rather childish. It was emotional. I think I would have expected better from the sort of managements I would have in business.
This crisis would be dealt with by a subcommittee of the board, which included Benjamin, Lord Mancroft.
We had resolved that after a very short period of time, we should back our chief executive. We don't just appointed him. But, you back your chief executive. And you can't undermine him with his staff. That would be quite wrong.
A week into the crisis, the board appeared to back Juke, but wanted an amicable solution. They invited Janet to a meeting.
I was told Edward Juke was staying and I was going. Or they wanted me to go. I wasn't actually dismissed, but at that stage they were sort of suggesting that I might like to resign with financial incentives. And I didn't want to.
The board felt they couldn't sack the popular Janet George.
It was up to Edward to resolve. If a chief executive has a problem with a member of his staff, he must resolve the situation. Either he's got to work with that person. If he decides he can't work with that person, then that person must go.
Juke thought he had their authority to remove Janet George. 10 days after her memo was written, he acted.
Yeah, he sort of called me in on the Wednesday morning. It was about 9:15. And he said, I want you to leave now. And I said, pardon?
Janet didn't go quietly. Janet went screaming and kicking. In fact, the night afterwards, they had to carry her out, so drunk out of the office I'd left, that she was incapable of standing.
I was as drunk as a skunk on Thursday night. I think I woke up on the Friday morning and I thought it was just all a bad dream.
I was devastated by Janet's dismissal, and I knew from the moment I heard it that this was the powder keg, that the society would blow up.
The story of Janet George's sacking quickly made the papers. She had excellent press contacts.
She whipped up considerable amount of disquiet in most of the press.
I wasn't going to hide away. I didn't feel that I was in the wrong. And if journalists rang up and asked, I'd talk to them.
One man was very worried, the editor of Horse and Hound, Arnold Garvey.
She was perceived as the people's champion. She was the one person who, through thick and thin, had stood up there in all the awkward moments and had fought for hunting. That's how the people in the countryside saw her.
The press used every trick they could.
The Horse and Hound published a wonderful photo of him, swigging from the biggest flask you've ever seen. Nobody has a flask that size.
Well, would you be seen with a flask about so big? I can't understand how he ever allowed that picture to be taken,
Of course, the members got into a fury as well, because the Horse and Hounds, which they read regularly, was just non-stop wanting Janet back.
There, stoking the flames as ever, was Janet's old ally, Lord Kimball.
I was on the telephone the whole time. Of course I was. I wanted to be certain that I was reflecting their views.
Hunting remained under threat. There was the spectre of a new bill next year. But the board was getting worried about the new boss.
Fox be long way ahead by now. Great hunt, though. I think we took our eye off the political angle, and particularly the need to understand membership organisations and campaigning organisations. And therefore, we probably slanted the job in the wrong angle.
If you get rid of Joan of Arc, you can't win. You can't do this. This was a fatal mistake.
I wasn't worried about what they were calling me in the press. It was the fact that there would be a chain reaction down the system. And what I needed more than anything was the support of the board to bide and give me time.
Juke thought his strategy was beginning to work. He had raised £2 million. He decided it would be just the moment to take his long-arranged family holiday. But Lord Kimball was not amused.
The game fair was coming on, which is the sort of most important function of the year. And the next thing I heard was that Mr. Juke, the chairman, had allowed Mr. Juke to go on holiday.
The fact that they wanted me to go around kissing babies' heads at a game fair was completely wrong, because we've been doing that for the last 20 years and we haven't succeeded. And in the last 10 years, there's been 4 private members' bills to ban hunting, and surely all the chief executives in that period went to every game fair, but it hasn't made a hape of the difference. And if my being at the game fair made a hape of the difference to that, I would have cancelled my holidays for it tomorrow, but it wouldn't have.
If you've taken the job, you may have booked your holiday in Spain, but you have to tell your wife that plans have changed. You've got a new job, and one of the main commitments of your job is to be at the game fair.
Juke cut his holiday short to return for the final day of the game fair. He organised a photo call, proud of his achievement in raising the $2 million. But he got a reception he wasn't expecting from the journalists.
They were whipped up into a frenzy, something about why hadn't I been to the game fair from day one.
Having sacked Janet, he was always going to get that barbed question, which is almost impossible to field.
And when I sat down, it just came at me. Janet George, why wasn't I there? What was I doing about this? Did the money that was coming in have strings attached? And it wasn't a sensible debate. It was just like wild animals, and I was amazed.
Set upon by journalists, pilloried by his members, he felt he had finally lost the confidence of the board.
They were very angry, our members. They were very upset, and quite rightly so. And it was a very difficult time.
In the end, even one day at the game fair was enough for Juke.
I discussed it at depth with my wife as I drove back from the game fair, what the next step should be, and we made our decision that I would present the strategy and resign at the next board meeting.
Well, it's like all battles. It was exciting, and it ended up, Mr. Juke, quite rightly, felt the only proper thing to do was, and he resigned.
We made a botch of it. Sorry, we'll try and do better next time.
Since August, Edward Juke has gone back to a profitable life in industry. Janet George is using her talents for the British Horse Society. They both remain paid-up supporters of the Countryside Alliance.
What in effect had happened was that the Foster Bill had ended, and the hostility and the feelings outside in the countryside had transferred from the Foster Bill to me, I believe. So, and that had been whipped up in the press, and I'd almost become another fox hunting bill.
7 months after Juke's resignation, a new chief executive has just taken up the reins. The Countryside Alliance fights on.
It's a sport. That's the great thing. You must play by the rules. The only thing is, a lot of people didn't know all the rules. That's the difficulty of one of these things. It's fun when you're winning, that's the point. I don't know, it would be very fun if we were losing, but touch wood, so far.